The ground trembled beneath Jerome's feet as the earthquake hit. Echo, his loyal German shepherd, suddenly froze ears, perked eyes locked on the dirt. Then, with a low growl, the dog dashed toward the southern field. Jerome followed, his heart pounding. There in the earth, a massive crack had formed, but it wasn't just any crack. A dark, hollow opening stretched into the depths below. Echo barked, refusing to go any closer. Jerome felt a chill crawl up his spine. What was down there? And why did it feel like something was waiting for him? The morning sun had barely risen when Jerome stepped onto the porch, the familiar creak of the old boards beneath his boots grounding him. He paused, taking in the sight of his farm, the land he'd known since childhood, stretching out under the soft golden light. Echo stood beside him, her dark eyes scanning the horizon, ears twitching at the slightest sound. There was something in the air today, a weight that even the wind seemed reluctant to lift. The silence was thicker than usual, more oppressive, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Jerome had always found peace in the land's quiet rhythm. For 40 years he had worked these fields, his hands stained with the soil that his grandfather had tilled, then his father, and now him. It was more than just work. It was a bond, an understanding that stretched back generations. When his father had passed, it had been up to Jerome to take care of the land to ensure that it stayed in the family. The thought of selling, of leaving, had never crossed his mind. This was his place. This was where he belonged. But today the earth felt different. He scratched at his beard, his eyes lingering on the southern field. The animals were unsettled, their restless movements catching his attention. The chickens weren't laying as they should, and the cattle had been skittish, milling near the northern fence, pawing the ground as though something underneath was stirring. He'd chalked it up to the dry spell, the heat of the summer, pressing down harder than usual, but now with Echo acting strange, the uneasy feeling in his chest only deepened. "Something's wrong, isn't it, girl?" he murmured to Echo, his voice barely audible above the rustling of the grass. The dog looked up at him, then back at the field. She growled softly, her body tense, eyes narrowing. Jerome's gaze followed hers, but he saw nothing out of the ordinary. The field stretched peacefully under the morning light, the only sound, the occasional whisper of wind through the tall cornstalks. But the unease persisted like a dark cloud gathering just out of sight. Echo wasn't the type to act up without a reason. Jerome had learned to trust her instincts over the years, especially when it came to things that didn't belong. Whether it was a trespasser or an unseen danger, she always knew when something was wrong long before he did. That's why he followed her now, even though his gut told him he shouldn't. He made his way across the yard, heading for the southern field where the land had cracked open during the earthquake. His boots sank slightly into the soft earth as he walked, the ground unusually warm beneath his feet. The dry summer had left the soil thirsty, but there was something more to it today, something that felt alive, shifting just below the surface. Echo moved ahead, her nose to the ground, circling the crack in the earth that had appeared the night of the earthquake. As he approached the edge, Jerome noticed the deep fissure stretching across the ground. It wasn't just a crack in the soil, this was something different. The earth had split open like an old wound, jagged and uneven. He crouched down, shining his flashlight into the gap, but the beam disappeared into a void swallowed by the darkness below. The air around him shifted, thickening with a strange metallic tang, as if the earth itself had exhaled something foul. The wind had stopped, and even the usual rustle of the trees seemed muted. The quiet was deafening. "Echo," Jerome said softly, but the dog didn't respond. She stood at the edge of the crack, her fur bristling, staring into the dark abyss below. Jerome felt a pang of uncertainty. He had worked this land for decades, but this was something else, something unnatural. He leaned closer to the crack, shining his flashlight deeper, hoping to catch a glimpse of what lay hidden beneath. At first he saw only dirt and rock, but then something caught the light, a faint glint like metal gleaming in the beam. He froze. It wasn't just a natural formation. It was too smooth, too deliberate. Jerome's heart began to race. He couldn't explain it, but the feeling in his gut told him that whatever this was, it didn't belong. He backed away from the edge, a bead of sweat forming at his temple, despite the cool morning air. Echo turned, her eyes still fixed on the crack, her growl deepening. Jerome didn't need to look back to know what she was sensing. Something was down there, something he hadn't been prepared to find. He straightened, his mind racing. The quiet, the unease, and Echo's movements, it all clicked together. This wasn't just a random crack from an earthquake. It was as though the earth itself was hiding something beneath it, something that had been buried for years, maybe decades. But why? And how had it gone unnoticed for so long? For a moment, Jerome stood frozen, caught between curiosity and dread. The land that had always been his, that had belonged to his family for generations, suddenly felt foreign, alien even. It was as if the earth was shifting beneath his very feet, revealing a secret that had been kept from him for too long. "All right, girl," Jerome muttered, his voice steadying. "Let's go get some answers." He turned back toward the house, his mind already working through the possibilities. The land had been his family's for as long as he could remember, but now it seemed to be holding secrets, secrets that could change everything. Echo followed him silently, her ears still perked, her gaze occasionally flicking back toward the crack in the earth. Whatever was buried beneath their feet, it was only a matter of time before it came to light. Jerome's footsteps were heavier as he walked back to the house, the air feeling thicker with each step. The tension in his chest grew, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath him had become something unfamiliar. As he stepped inside, he paused for a moment, looking at the old wood beams above him, creaking with the passage of time. The house, like the land, had been passed down through generations, but now both seemed different. The usual peace of his mornings was gone, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. Echo followed Jerome closely, her dark eyes never leaving him. She was always by his side, always vigilant, but today something about her behavior unsettled him. She wasn't just following him, she was waiting, watching, almost as if she knew something was coming, something neither of them could avoid. Jerome ran a hand through his graying hair, looking at the kitchen counter where a few cups sat forgotten. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, but to Jerome the sound was distant, almost drowned out by the unspoken weight in the room. For a moment he stood there, unsure of what to do next. He had always been the type of man who trusted his instincts, the type of man who worked with the land rather than questioning it. But today his instincts were telling him something was wrong, something he couldn't ignore. He glanced out the window toward the southern field. The crack in the earth still lingered in his mind, the dark void waiting for him to understand what lay beneath. It wasn't just a crack, it was a sign, a warning. But who or what was it warning him about? "Maybe I'm overthinking this," he muttered under his breath. But as the words left his mouth, he didn't believe them. His heart raced again, and the uneasy feeling he couldn't shake returned. He reached for his phone and dialed Henry's number, his finger hesitating before pressing call. The phone rang, and then the familiar gruff voice of Henry answered. "Jerome, yeah, Henry. I need you to come over. Something's not right." His voice was steady, but the words felt heavier than usual. "You find something?" Henry asked, his tone shifting. Jerome could hear the slight concern in his friend's voice, even over the phone. Jerome paused for a moment, looking at Echo, who was now lying on the floor, her eyes half closed but alert. "It's the land, Henry. The crack. It's not just a crack. There's something down there, something big." "I'll be over soon," Henry said, his voice thick with the unspoken understanding between them. "Stay put." Jerome hung up the phone and turned to Echo, who had now risen from the floor, her ears perked up once again. Her gaze followed him as he moved toward the door, and he felt a rush of gratitude for the dog's constant presence. It wasn't just the dog's loyalty, there was a trust there that went beyond words, beyond the simple understanding of companionship. Echo was his partner in this life, in this quiet but increasingly dangerous world. The thought of going back to the field, to the crack in the earth, filled him with both dread and determination. He couldn't let this go. He couldn't ignore it. Not when it was his land, his legacy. He had spent too many years working, protecting, and nurturing this place to let it slip away into something dark and unknown. He grabbed his jacket, and as he slipped it on, the old door creaked behind him. He turned to find Echo standing there watching him. It was as if she understood, as if she knew the road ahead was going to be difficult. It wasn't just the farm that was at stake. It was something deeper, something that had been buried for far too long. Jerome stepped outside, the familiar air of the farm filling his lungs, but it didn't feel the same. The wind had shifted, carrying with it that strange metallic scent that had lingered around the crack. He stood for a moment, taking in the land, letting the quiet surround him. This was his place, his family's place, and yet for the first time in his life it felt foreign. He turned to look at the southern field again. The crack. It was still there, the earth gaping open like a wound, waiting for him to acknowledge it. Echo was already moving ahead, her instincts guiding her as always. Jerome followed her, his boots crunching on the dry earth. As they reached the field, he could feel the weight of the land pressing down on him. The memories of his father, of his grandfather, seemed to fade, replaced by a growing sense of urgency. He needed answers. He needed to know what was down there hidden beneath the surface. Echo stopped at the edge of the crack, her stance protective, almost as if she was daring whatever lay beneath to show itself. Jerome crouched down beside her, peering into the dark void once more. The beam from his flashlight cut through the darkness, but it revealed nothing. Only the cold, empty blackness staring back at him. "Come on, girl," he whispered more to himself than to Echo. "Let's figure this out." Echo barked softly, her ears flicking in response. Then, without another sound, she moved forward, stepping cautiously toward the edge of the crack. Jerome stood up, watching her for a moment, then followed. The field was quiet again, but the silence felt different now. The weight in the air had grown heavier, pressing down on Jerome's chest with every breath. He stood at the edge of the crack, his flashlight illuminating the dark abyss beneath his feet. Echo was close, just a few steps away, her fur still bristling as she stared down into the chasm. Jerome felt a chill run up his spine. There was something down there, something he couldn't yet see but could feel deep in his bones. He crouched down to get a closer look, the flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The crack in the earth stretched deeper than he had first thought, revealing a tunnel-like passage, its walls smooth and unnatural. It didn't look like the kind of crack caused by an earthquake. The edges were too neat, the depth too deliberate. He ran a gloved hand over the soil near the edge, feeling the warmth of the earth beneath his fingertips. There was a strange, almost chemical scent in the air, now faint but unmistakable, a metallic acrid tang that made his throat tighten. Echo's low growl broke the silence. Her posture was tense, her hackles raised as she looked back at Jerome. The dog's behavior was enough to convince him that this was more than just an oddity of nature. He had spent enough time with Echo to understand when she was sensing danger. He stood slowly, trying to shake off the feeling that was creeping over him. His mind was racing with questions. What was this? Why had it appeared now, after all these years of peace? A noise behind him made him spin around. A soft crunch of gravel underfoot. His heart skipped a beat and he reached instinctively for the flashlight at his side, turning to see Henry standing a few yards away, his face drawn with concern. "You called," Henry said, his voice gruff. "What's going on? I thought you were overreacting, but I see why you're worried." Jerome nodded, not trusting himself to speak at first. He just gestured toward the crack in the earth, his gaze fixed on the darkness below. "There's something down there, something unnatural. I've never seen anything like it." Henry squinted down into the hole, his brow furrowing. "Hell of a crack. But you sure it's not just from the earthquake? Could have opened up naturally." Jerome shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the abyss. "No, it's not just the earthquake. Look at it. It's too clean, too precise. This wasn't caused by nature. Something's down there, Henry. And I think it's been there for a long time." Henry crouched down beside him, his flashlight sweeping over the edges of the crack. For a long moment he didn't say anything, just studied the earth, his face hardening with a mix of curiosity and caution. "All right," Henry said finally, standing up. "Let's take a closer look. But we need to be careful. We don't know what we're dealing with here." Jerome nodded his mind, already jumping ahead to what they needed to do. They would have to go deeper. They had to know what was buried under his family's land, what had been hidden for so long. Echo barked sharply, her head snapping to the side. Jerome turned just in time to see a shadow move at the edge of the field out of the corner of his eye. It was quick, too fast for him to make out. "Did you see that?" Jerome asked, his voice low. Henry looked up sharply, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. "What was it? I don't know," Jerome replied, his heart beginning to race. "But something's watching us. Something that doesn't want us to find out what's down there." Echo's growl deepened as the shadow vanished into the trees. The hairs on the back of Jerome's neck stood on end. It wasn't just the land that was hiding secrets. Someone or something was watching, waiting for them to uncover the truth. Jerome stood still for a moment, his gaze flickering from the empty field back to the shadowy tree line. Echo had already moved, her instincts guiding her, as she sniffed the air, her body tense and low to the ground. It wasn't just the unease from the crack in the earth that troubled Jerome now, it was the feeling that someone or something was watching them. The quiet of the field had turned ominous, heavy with anticipation. "Let's head back," Jerome muttered more to himself than to Henry. But just as he turned, a voice broke the silence. "Jerome," it was Henry calling from the edge of the field, a note of urgency in his voice. Jerome's heart jumped, his pulse quickening. He turned to see Henry holding up a piece of red plastic, thin, almost like packaging material, but with something unmistakable printed across it. TNT. The word hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind raced, trying to process what it meant. TNT explosives. Whoever was behind this wasn't just hiding something underground. They were willing to destroy it, to erase any trace of what had been buried. Jerome's hands clenched into fists, his body taut with anger and confusion. "They're trying to cover their tracks," Henry said, voice grim. "Whoever's behind this, they don't want anyone finding out." Jerome swallowed hard, his eyes locked on the TNT scrap in Henry's hand. He had known there was something dangerous about what he had found, but this was something else entirely. Whoever had buried this tunnel system under his family's land had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden, and now they were trying to destroy it. Echo's low growl snapped Jerome out of his thoughts. He turned to see her standing at the edge of the field, staring intently at something in the distance. Her body was stiff, her hackles raised a sign that she was sensing something beyond their sight. Jerome felt his heart skip a beat. "Stay close, girl," he whispered, even though he knew Echo didn't need the warning. She was always one step ahead, always alert to things he couldn't see or hear. They walked cautiously toward Echo, the tension in the air palpable. Every step felt heavy, as if the earth beneath them was waiting to swallow them whole. Jerome's thoughts were racing. How deep did this go? Who had been here before him? And what had they been trying to hide? As they neared Echo, the dog turned and led them further into the field, back toward the southern edge, where the crack had opened up. Jerome's mind was flooded with memories of his father, his grandfather of the years spent working this land. It had always felt like their land, their inheritance, their legacy. But now it felt like a trap, a stage for something dark and ancient that had been concealed for far too long. Henry spoke up again, his voice a little quieter this time. "Jerome, do you have any idea who's behind this? Anyone who might have had a reason to dig under your land?" Jerome shook his head, frustration bubbling to the surface. "No idea. But I have a bad feeling we're not dealing with something as simple as an old mining shaft or irrigation system. This isn't just about land or crops anymore. Someone went through a hell of a lot of trouble to keep this buried, and I think we've just scratched the surface." Echo's growl grew louder, and Jerome looked up just in time to see movement, a shadow flicker near the edge of the trees, too fast to be human, too deliberate to be an animal. His breath caught in his throat. "Did you see that?" Jerome asked, his voice tight. Henry's eyes scanned the trees, his hand subtly moving toward his belt. "Yeah, I saw something. We're not alone." The sense of danger was immediate, palpable. Something was out there, hidden in the shadows, watching them. Jerome's heart was pounding now, the adrenaline rushing through his veins. He didn't know who or what was out there, but he knew one thing: they were running out of time. "Get back to the house," Jerome said, his voice sharp. "We'll figure this out later. Right now, we need to get somewhere safe." But before he could turn, a loud crack echoed through the air, a sharp, sudden sound like a branch snapping under pressure. Echo barked furiously, her teeth bared as she bolted toward the trees, her eyes wide with fear. Jerome's heart raced. He had no time to hesitate. "Come on, Henry," he shouted, already running toward the trees where Echo had disappeared. Henry didn't need to be told twice. They were running side by side, the ground thundering under their feet. Whatever had been watching them was close, too close. And this time, they weren't just going to watch from the sidelines. They were going in after the truth. Jerome's heart was still racing as he sprinted through the field, his boots kicking up dirt behind him. Echo's bark echoed through the trees, and Henry was right on his heels. They weren't sure what they were running toward, but the urgency in Echo's reaction made it clear that they had no time to waste. The tall grass parted in front of them as they reached the edge of the woods. Echo had stopped her body, stiff eyes fixed on something just ahead. Jerome followed her gaze, his breath catching in his throat as he saw the shadow dart between the trees. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Someone was hiding just out of sight. "Stay close," Jerome said under his breath, motioning for Henry to keep his distance. Echo was already leading the way, her instincts sharp, her every movement calculated. The air was thick with tension, and Jerome could feel his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything his family's farm, his life here, was spiraling out of control. This land had always been a constant in his life, a connection to his past, his father and his grandfather. But now it felt like the earth beneath his feet was betraying him. There was something hidden here, something dangerous, and he didn't know who to trust anymore. As they ventured deeper into the trees, Jerome's thoughts drifted back to his childhood. His father had always been the one to take care of things, to make sure the land was safe and productive. Jerome had watched him with awe, the way he worked the soil, the way he knew every inch of the land like the back of his hand. It had always seemed so simple, just hard work and dedication. But now, with every step they took, Jerome realized how little he actually knew about the land. The things hidden beneath it, the secrets buried in its depths, were beyond his understanding. The further they went into the woods, the more the silence around them seemed to press in. The birds had stopped singing, and the rustling of the leaves felt distant, muffled. Echo stopped suddenly, her head turning toward a thicket of trees. Jerome instinctively reached for his flashlight, his hand shaking slightly as he pulled it from his belt. "Echo, what is it?" Jerome whispered, crouching down beside her. The dog's ears were perked, her body tense, but she didn't move. There was something here, something she could sense that he couldn't. A faint odor clung to the air, sour and metallic, like something had been disturbed in the ground. The same smell he'd noticed earlier near the crack in the earth. Henry caught up, breathing hard, his eyes scanning the area. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. "Something's here," Jerome replied, his voice tight, "and I don't think we're supposed to find it." Just as he said the words, there was a rustle in the bushes ahead. Echo's growl was low and guttural, her hackles raised as she stepped in front of Jerome. Without warning, the brush parted, and a figure emerged from the shadows. Jerome instinctively took a step back, his heart thudding in his chest. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by a hood. For a moment, everything felt frozen. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching them with an intensity that made the air feel thick with hostility. "Who are you?" Jerome called out, his voice firm but edged with caution. The figure didn't answer. Instead, he took a step forward, his boots crunching on the dry leaves. Echo growled again, stepping closer to Jerome, but the figure didn't flinch. Instead, he raised one hand slowly, as though signaling for them to stay back. "I wouldn't get any closer." The figure finally spoke, his voice low, almost a whisper. "There's nothing here for you." Jerome's grip tightened around his flashlight. "What do you mean, nothing here? What are you hiding?" The figure's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking from Jerome to Henry, then back to Echo. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he said, his voice colder now. "Leave this place. It's not meant for people like you." Jerome's pulse quickened. He could feel his breath coming faster, his mind racing. This was it. The danger he had sensed in the land, the unease that had been building inside him since the crack appeared, this was the moment it had all led to. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just some random trespasser. He was part of something much bigger, something that had been here long before Jerome ever stepped onto this land. "We're not leaving until we know what's really going on here," Jerome said, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took another step forward, and then another, until he was only a few feet away from Jerome. Echo's growl deepened, but Jerome stayed calm, holding his ground. He wasn't backing down now. With a sudden, almost violent motion, the figure reached into his coat and pulled out a small device, metallic and gleaming in the low light. For a moment, Jerome didn't recognize it, but the sense of danger that radiated from the device was enough to make him take a step back. "Stay back," the figure warned again, his voice now more urgent. "This is your last warning." Jerome's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. The device in the figure's hand looked like some kind of tool, a weapon maybe. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. Without thinking, Jerome moved, shoving Henry behind him as he stepped forward. "What is that thing?" he demanded. The figure hesitated for a split second, and in that moment, Jerome made his move. With a quick motion, he lunged forward, knocking the device out of the figure's hand and sending it crashing to the ground. Echo barked fiercely, her body charging forward as the man staggered back, clearly caught off guard. "Get down!" Jerome shouted, pushing Henry to the ground as the figure turned and sprinted back into the trees. Echo followed in hot pursuit, her bark echoing through the woods. Jerome stood panting, his body trembling with adrenaline. The man had gotten away, but now he had a clearer picture of what he was up against. Whoever this man was, he wasn't acting alone, and whatever secret was buried beneath the land, it was worth protecting at any cost. Jerome's heart was still pounding in his chest as the figure disappeared into the woods, swallowed by the dense trees. Echo had chased after him, but after a few moments the barking faded and the silence returned. It was a chilling, kind of quiet one that pressed down on Jerome's chest and made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He stood there for a moment, frozen, his mind racing. That was no ordinary trespasser. The man hadn't just threatened them, he had known something about the land, about the crack in the earth, something he wasn't willing to reveal. Jerome's grip tightened around the flashlight in his hand, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. What the hell was that? Henry's voice broke through the tension, sharp and filled with disbelief. He stood just behind Jerome, still catching his breath, his eyes scanning the trees where the figure had vanished. "I don't know," Jerome said, his voice hoarse. "But he's not just some random guy. He knew something about the land, about the tunnel." Henry looked at him, his brow furrowed. "This is getting out of hand. I thought you were just overthinking things with that crack, but now, I don't know what to think." "I can't explain it either," Jerome admitted. "But it's not just the crack. That man, he didn't want us to find out what's down there. And now I'm even more sure that it's something we weren't meant to see." Jerome turned back toward the field, the tension still thick in the air. The land, which had always felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a battleground. He had spent years working these fields, pouring sweat into the soil, ensuring the legacy of his family would live on through their hard work. But now it was all under threat, and not just from nature. Someone or something was hiding secrets beneath the surface. "Let's just head back," Henry suggested. "This whole thing is getting too complicated. Maybe we should call someone who can help." Jerome shook his head, the thought of involving anyone else sending a shiver down his spine. "No, we can't call anyone yet. Not until we know what we're dealing with. There's too much at stake. If we tell the wrong person, if we bring in the wrong authorities, it could all get covered up." just like it's been for years. Henry didn't argue, but his expression remained tense, his eyes darting nervously between the trees. Jerome could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, the fear of making the wrong move creeping in. But the truth was, he didn't have a choice. This was his land, his legacy. And he couldn't let it be taken away by some shadowy group who thought they could bury the truth beneath the earth. "We need to get to the bottom of this," Jerome said, his voice resolute. He turned to Echo, who had returned to his side panting but with a look of unease in her eyes. She was on edge, and he knew that meant they were getting closer to something dangerous. "Let's get back to the house. We need to make a plan." As they made their way back through the field, Jerome's thoughts kept circling around the man in the woods. The warning, the threat. The way he had moved his calmness despite Echo's growling all suggested he wasn't afraid. In fact, he had seemed prepared for them to find the tunnel, almost like he knew they would. "What do you think he meant?" Henry asked, his voice quieter now. "About us not being meant to find it," Jerome thought for a moment, weighing the possibilities. The figure's words echoed in his mind. "You don't know what you're dealing with." It felt like a warning, like they had stepped into a world they weren't supposed to know about. But why? Why would someone go to such lengths to keep this a secret? "I think whatever's down there, whoever's behind this, they've been hiding it for a long time," Jerome said slowly. "And now they don't want us digging it up. It's like they're trying to protect something. But that's what I need to know." As they reached the house, the weight of the situation only deepened. The field stretched out behind them, calm and quiet once more, but Jerome could feel the darkness lingering, pressing down on him. He had always believed that hard work and honesty were enough to protect the things you loved. But now he realized that wasn't true. Some things, some secrets were worth more than land or legacy. And whatever was buried beneath the soil, it wasn't just about protecting it from people like him. It was about keeping it hidden from the world. Echo stood at the door, her eyes fixed on Jerome as he walked inside. She was waiting for him to make the next move, as she always did. She was more than just a dog to him. She was his partner, his anchor. And right now, he needed her more than ever. Inside the house felt cold, despite the warmth of the sun outside. Jerome sat at the table, his hands trembling as he picked up the phone. He knew what he had to do next, but the fear gnawing at his stomach made every decision feel heavy. This wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a fight for everything he held dear. "I'm going to need help," he muttered, dialing a number he hadn't called in years. The phone rang twice before the voice on the other end picked up. "It's Jerome," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I need you to come. It's about the farm. There's something you need to see." Jerome sat at the kitchen table, the phone still pressed to his ear. His fingers tapped nervously against the worn wood, the sound punctuating the silence that filled the room. The voice on the other end, familiar and soothing, seemed far away, even though it was only a few states over. "It's been a while, Jerome. What's going on?" It was Arthur Langford, an old friend and the town historian, a man who knew the land and its secrets better than anyone. Jerome had known him for years, even before the land had become something more than just soil beneath his feet. Arthur's mind was sharp, and his knowledge of the area's history had helped Jerome in the past, when he'd run into legal issues with property boundaries and the like. But today, he needed something more than just history. He needed answers. Arthur, Jerome began, his voice tight. "I think I've uncovered something big, something buried beneath my land. I need you to come down here. It's something I can't handle alone." There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh. "What have you found?" Jerome hesitated, looking over at Echo, who had settled near the door, watching him intently. She seemed to sense the weight of the moment, her eyes locked onto his, waiting for him to speak. "I don't know what to call it yet," Jerome finally said. "A tunnel. Maybe more than one. Something. Industrial. And I think whoever dug it, they didn't want anyone to know. They've been hiding something down there, and I think it's been there for a long time." Arthur's voice was more serious now. "You're sure? You're not just dealing with an old drainage pipe or something?" "No," Jerome said firmly. "This is something else. It's too perfect. Too deliberate. And now I've got people coming around. They're trying to stop me from finding out what's really down there." Arthur paused again, then said, "All right. I'll be there as soon as I can. In the meantime, keep your head down. Whoever this is, they don't want to be found." Jerome nodded, even though Arthur couldn't see him. "I will. Thanks, Arthur." After hanging up, he stood up and walked to the back porch, the weight of what he had just shared pressing heavily on his chest. He had never been one to ask for help, but this was different. He couldn't fight this alone. Not when it felt like the entire world, his world, was about to shift in ways he couldn't control. Echo followed him outside, her presence comforting, but her tense body language told him that she felt it too. The danger, the unknown. They had been through a lot together, but nothing had ever felt like this. The land, once familiar and safe, now seemed to be hiding its darkest secrets, and they had just cracked the surface. Jerome walked out to the field, the morning air crisp and fresh, but the silence of the land felt different now. The wind didn't carry the same peaceful hum it once had. Even the trees, once full of life, seemed to stand still, watching, waiting. The crack in the earth was still there, wide and gaping, but now it seemed less like an anomaly and more like a warning. It was as though the land itself was asking him, "What will you do now?" Echo stayed by his side as they approached the site, and as they got closer, he couldn't help but notice the faint smell in the air again. The metallic tang that had been present since the day the crack appeared. It was stronger now, more noticeable, like something was slowly seeping into the earth, something he couldn't yet understand. As he knelt by the edge of the crack, Jerome's mind wandered back to the days when his father was still alive. He had been a man of few words, but his love for the land was undeniable. Jerome had spent his childhood learning how to tend to the farm, how to care for the animals, how to coax the soil into producing crops. His father had always said the land would reward hard work and patience. It had been a simple truth that Jerome had believed with all his heart. But now, standing on the same land, everything felt uncertain. The ground he had worked so hard to preserve and protect was hiding something. And the more he thought about it, the more it became clear whatever was down there was not just a part of the land, it was part of a much bigger picture, a picture he wasn't sure he was ready to see. "Echo," he said softly, looking down at the dog. "What do you think? What's really down there?" Echo didn't answer, of course, but her gaze met his, and for a moment it felt like she understood him completely. She too could sense the danger, the weight of the secret buried under the earth. Just then a sound broke the stillness. A car engine. Jerome's heart skipped a beat as he turned to see a familiar figure driving toward him. It was Arthur. His truck was kicking up dust as it rolled up the driveway, and Jerome could see the look of concern on Arthur's face, even from a distance. Echo's tail gave a small wag as she recognized the old man, but Jerome couldn't shake the feeling that the moment had arrived. This was it. They were about to uncover something that had been buried for far too long. Arthur parked the truck and climbed out, his eyes scanning the field before locking on Jerome. "Jerome," Arthur said, his voice low and serious. "What did you find?" Jerome didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned toward the crack in the earth, his stomach tight. "It's down there. I need your help to understand what it is." Arthur followed Jerome to the edge of the crack, and they both stared down into the darkness. Jerome could feel his pulse quicken as he waited for Arthur's reaction. "Well," Arthur said, "I've seen my share of land and history, but I've never seen anything like this." His voice was soft, almost reverent as he knelt down next to the edge. This isn't just a mistake. Whoever put this here, they didn't want it found. And now it's up to us to figure out why." Arthur squatted next to the crack in the earth, the soft light from his flashlight dancing across the jagged edges of the hole. Jerome stood a few feet away, his heart pounding in his chest. Everything felt like it was spiraling out of control, his father's land, his family's legacy, and now the eerie discovery beneath his feet. For the first time in his life, the land didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a battleground. Echo stood beside Jerome, her body tense as she watched Arthur. The dog's presence gave Jerome a sliver of comfort, but it didn't ease the knot in his stomach. He had always trusted his instincts, trusted that the land would never betray him. But now, with this crack opening up before him, he was starting to question everything. "I've been doing this for years," Arthur said, his voice low and steady, "but I've never seen anything like this. This isn't just some natural shift in the earth. Something's been done to this land deliberately." Jerome didn't respond right away. His eyes were locked on the crack in the ground, his mind racing. What did it all mean? And why was he the one to discover it? His father had worked this land for decades, and his grandfather before him. Neither of them had ever said anything about tunnels, about what might be buried beneath their feet. For a brief moment, Jerome allowed himself to remember his father, his rugged, weathered hands, the way he would gently run his fingers through the soil, as if listening to it, understanding it. He had always told Jerome that the land was a gift, something to be cherished, something to protect. But now Jerome felt betrayed by that same land. His father had passed away, and Jerome had inherited not just the farm but the weight of his father's unspoken trust. And now this Arthur turned back to him, his eyes reflecting the same unease Jerome felt. "You said something about this being connected to something larger. What do you mean by that?" Jerome's throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't find the words. He glanced down at Echo, who was sniffing around the edge of the crack, her sharp senses alert. She too felt the weight of the discovery. Jerome's hands shook as he spoke, his voice a little more strained than usual. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know what it is, but it's not just a random crack. It's too deliberate, too planned. There's something down there, something that shouldn't be hidden beneath the land. And whoever did this, they've been working in the shadows for a long time." Arthur didn't reply immediately, but his expression grew more serious. He straightened up, brushing dirt off his hands. Whoever did this, he said they've been here before. This isn't the first time someone's dug beneath the earth trying to hide something. Jerome's chest tightened. His mind was flooded with thoughts. Thoughts of his grandfather's stories of the land he had inherited, of the quiet years when everything felt right. But now, with the crack in front of him, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had always been there, waiting for the right time to surface. Arthur, Jerome said, his voice rough. What do you know about the history of this place? I mean, really know. Have you ever heard anything? Anything that might explain this. Arthur looked at him, his face thoughtful, then nodded slowly. There are things buried in the history of this land, Jerome. Things that most people have forgotten or ignored. But I remember stories. Stories from the old-timers, the ones who've passed. They spoke of things, of tunnels, of hidden workings beneath the earth. They were whispered like old legends, stories of men who dug into the land long before your family took it over. Jerome's heart skipped a beat. What kind of stories? Arthur shook his head, his brow furrowing. Stories of a mining operation, of companies coming through looking for something beneath the soil, something valuable. But they were never spoken of openly. I always thought it was just talk. But now it seems like there was more to it. Jerome felt the ground beneath his feet shift as if the land itself was trying to speak to him. He swallowed hard, trying to absorb what Arthur was saying. Could it be true? Had there been something hidden here long before he'd ever inherited the farm? His hands tightened around the flashlight, his mind grappling with the enormity of the situation. What did they dig for? Jerome asked, his voice tight, with a new, sharper curiosity. Arthur's face darkened. Gold, oil. There are rumors about both, but no one ever confirmed it. Some people say it was just a few scattered companies trying to extract resources without anyone noticing. Others say it was part of a larger operation, something that involved more than just this land. They wanted something, and they took it. Jerome felt the weight of the words sink into his chest. It wasn't just a mystery, it was a history of exploitation, of hidden treasures and buried secrets. The land wasn't just a gift, it had been a battleground long before he ever stepped foot on it. And now, as the crack in the earth seemed to pulse beneath him, Jerome understood that the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. Echo barked again, snapping him out of his thoughts. Jerome turned to see the dog darting toward the trees, ears perked, body low to the ground. She was on alert again. Jerome followed her, his heart racing. Echo, wait, Jerome called, but the dog was already too far ahead. Arthur followed him, his face tense with concern. What's going on? Jerome's gaze locked on Echo, who was now circling something just beyond the tree line. The dog's movements were erratic, her growl rising as she paced around a small mound of dirt. Jerome's breath caught in his throat. As he moved closer, he could see the faint outline of something buried beneath the earth, a piece of metal half buried, just like the one he had seen earlier near the crack. But this was different. This was something bigger, something more deliberate. He knelt down beside it, his fingers brushing the surface. The metal was cold, smooth, and unyielding, and as he touched it, the ground seemed to hum beneath him. He could feel the vibrations deep and steady, as though the earth itself was alive, pulsing with a secret that had been hidden for far too long. Jerome's mind raced. Whatever had been buried here, whatever had been hidden beneath the soil, was not just an accident. It was a message, and it was meant for him. Jerome's heart hammered in his chest as he knelt beside the mound of earth, the metal object just beneath the surface. Echo's growl had deepened into something more primal, more insistent, her body stiff as she stood guard over the discovery. Jerome's hand trembled as he reached down, brushing dirt away from the edges of the metal. The coldness of it sent a shiver down his spine. Arthur, look at this, Jerome said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. He didn't need to say more. Arthur was already at his side, his face grim as he looked at the object partially buried in the soil. It was like nothing Jerome had seen before, a large cylindrical piece of metal, weathered and corroded by time, but still unmistakably man-made. What the hell is this? Arthur muttered, crouching down next to him. He reached out, brushing his fingers over the surface. This isn't something you find just lying around. This was intentionally buried here. Jerome didn't answer, his mind racing. The discovery, the rumblings of the earth, the strange metallic scent, it all pointed to something far bigger than just a simple tunnel. It was a hidden operation, one that had been concealed beneath his land for years, perhaps even decades. And now the pieces were finally falling into place. Echo barked again, more urgently this time, and Jerome stood, his body tense. The dog was acting more frantic than usual, her eyes scanning the tree line, her body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Jerome turned to Arthur, his heart racing. Something was wrong. We're not alone, Jerome said, his voice tight. They're coming. Arthur looked around, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. Who? Jerome didn't need to answer. The sound of an engine in the distance was unmistakable, growing louder as it approached. Jerome's blood ran cold. The same feeling he had when the mysterious figure appeared in the woods earlier was back. They weren't just dealing with a hidden secret, they were dealing with people who didn't want this secret exposed, and they would do anything to protect it. "Get down," Jerome ordered, pulling Arthur behind a cluster of trees. Echo stood at the ready, her eyes never leaving the path where the engine noise was coming from. Jerome's mind raced, calculating the risk, weighing their options. The figures were closing in. They couldn't just stay here. "We need to get out of here," Arthur said, his voice low. He wasn't panicking, but Jerome could tell that the stakes had just gone up tenfold. Whoever these people were, they weren't afraid to kill to protect what was theirs. Jerome nodded his hand, gripping the flashlight tighter. "No, not yet. We need to get everything. We need evidence. We need to expose this." His eyes flicked over to the metal object still buried in the ground. This is the key. If we leave now, it's all for nothing." Arthur didn't argue. He understood. This wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about something much bigger, a secret so dangerous that people had gone to extreme lengths to keep it buried. Jerome stood up his legs, shaking from the adrenaline. Echo immediately moved ahead, her body moving with precision alert to every sound, every movement. "Stay close," Jerome told her. The dog glanced back, her gaze as sharp as ever before, darting forward into the trees. With Arthur right behind him, they moved silently through the underbrush, staying low and following Echo's lead. The sound of the engine had grown louder, closer now, and Jerome's pulse quickened. They couldn't let themselves be caught. Not now, not when they were so close. The figure appeared, suddenly emerging from the trees like a shadow. Jerome froze. The man who had warned them earlier, the one who had tried to stop them from uncovering the truth, was standing between them and the truck that had now parked just off the trail. He was tall, his face hidden by the shadow of his hood, but his posture was unmistakable. He wasn't here to talk. Jerome's breath hitched. "What do you want?" he called out, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. The figure didn't answer immediately. He simply watched them, his expression hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. Echo's growl deepened, her stance protective, but she didn't move forward. "You should have stayed away," the figure said, his voice low cold. "Now you've seen too much. It's too late." Jerome's hand instinctively reached for his phone, but the figure was faster. Before he could react, the man pulled something from his jacket, a small, sleek device that hummed to life, emitting a high-pitched sound. Jerome's blood ran cold as he realized what it was. It was a jammer. They couldn't call for help. They couldn't even record what was happening. The figure knew exactly how to handle this situation, and they were powerless to stop it. But Jerome wasn't giving up. He wasn't going to let them take this from him. Not now. Not after everything he'd been through. "I'm not leaving, Jerome," said his voice steady, as he stared the figure down. "Not until the truth is exposed." The figure smirked, a cold, humorless gesture. "You don't get to decide that. You should have listened when you had the chance." And then just like that, the man stepped aside, revealing two more figures armed and ready. The situation had escalated beyond what Jerome had anticipated. He had known this was dangerous, but now standing in front of the people who would do anything to protect their secret, he realized just how far they were willing to go to silence him. The sound of footsteps behind him made Jerome's blood run cold. Echo's growl deepened as she positioned herself between him and the men with the guns, her body a wall of fur and muscle. Jerome's pulse hammered in his ears. He had thought they were prepared for everything, but now faced with armed men intent on stopping them from uncovering the truth, the fear crept in. The figure's smirk from before only deepened. "You don't know what you're dealing with," the man said again, his voice low and chilling as he stepped closer to Jerome. "This is bigger than you. You shouldn't have come here." Jerome's eyes flicked between the men, his mind racing. Henry was still behind them, hidden for now, but Jerome could feel the weight of the moment. There was no way out. The only choice left was to push forward. This was it. No more hesitation. "I'm not leaving," Jerome said, his voice steady, despite the fear bubbling in his chest. He turned to Echo, his loyal companion, who seemed to be reading his thoughts. The dog's growl softened, but her stance remained firm, ready to protect him at all costs. The men didn't move, their eyes narrowed, sizing up Jerome, waiting for him to make a mistake. The air between them was thick with tension, and Jerome could almost feel the weight of the decision in the pit of his stomach. What was he really willing to sacrifice to protect the truth? He glanced back over his shoulder, looking for an opening, something that could shift the power in their favor. He knew that time was running out. Arthur was still back near the crack in the earth, likely trying to figure out their next move as well. But Jerome couldn't afford to wait. Not anymore. If they left now, the secret buried under his land, under his family's legacy, would be erased for good. The figure stepped closer, his hand twitching toward the weapon at his side. Jerome's hand reached for the flashlight, and in that split second everything seemed to slow. Echo barked her sharp, commanding sound, cutting through the charged silence. Jerome made his move. Without warning, he lunged forward, ducking under the man's arm and grabbing at the gun holstered at his waist. The man barely had time to react before Jerome wrenched the weapon away, sending it clattering to the ground. Echo pounced her jaws, snapping at the man's ankle as he stumbled back, cursing. "Move!" Jerome yelled to Henry, who was already on the move coming up from behind. Henry didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing another one of the armed men by the collar and pulling him off balance. The second man shouted, swinging at Henry, but it was too late. The power had shifted. The truth had to be protected no matter the cost. Jerome grabbed the flashlight again, shining it down into the crack in the earth. The light revealed a glimpse of the metal structure that had been hidden under layers of soil and time. He could see it more clearly now, the edges of the tunnel system, the walls that were too smooth to be natural. "We have to get to it," Jerome said, through gritted teeth, his eyes fixed on the hole, the key to everything. "They can't stop us now." Echo stayed close to him, her eyes still scanning the area, protecting them as they moved toward the opening. The sounds of the struggle behind them grew louder, but Jerome couldn't afford to look back. The only thing that mattered now was getting the evidence they needed to expose what had been hidden. Arthur's voice broke through the chaos. "Jerome, now's our chance." With one last look at the men now disoriented and off balance, Jerome nodded. They had what they needed. He wasn't going to let anyone destroy the truth. As they scrambled into the tunnel, a sense of finality washed over him. The land would never be the same again. Jerome's hand tightened around the flashlight, and with Echo leading the way, they descended into the depths of the earth toward the answers that had been buried for too long. Jerome stood at the edge of the tunnel, the weight of everything he'd uncovered pressing down on him. The earth beneath his feet, once a place of peace and connection, now felt like a battlefield. The secrets buried in the soil were no longer just about his family's land. They were about power, control, and exploitation that stretched back for decades, hidden in the very ground he had worked his whole life. Echo stood beside him, her body tense, but her loyalty unwavering. She had been with him every step of the way, his protector, his companion, but even she, in her quiet way, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. The land was changing, shifting beneath their feet, and Jerome knew the truth couldn't stay buried much longer. Arthur was still by his side, his face grim but resolute. Together they had uncovered the darkness hidden beneath the soil, but the real work was just beginning. The truth was powerful, but it was also dangerous. They couldn't let it be swept away or ignored not again. "We've got the evidence," Jerome said, his voice steady but laced with determination. "But what now? How do we make them listen? How do we expose this?" Arthur's voice was calm, but there was fire in it too. "We don't let them bury it again. We bring it to the surface. We make sure the world knows what's been hidden." Jerome's mind raced. He had been raised to believe in the simple truths of hard work and honesty, but now he saw how easily those who held power could twist the truth, bury it, and keep the world from seeing it. The land had been his inheritance, but now it felt like a battleground one, where secrets, lies, and manipulation had festered for far too long. As he thought about his father, his grandfather, and the generations before them, Jerome realized the struggle wasn't just about the land, it was about what the land had been used for, what had been taken from it. The betrayal of his family's trust had been hidden beneath the surface, and now it was up to him to bring it to light. Jerome stood taller, the weight of the truth heavy in his chest, but no longer a burden. The land had always been his to protect, but now it felt like a mission to reclaim what had been stolen from his family, from his ancestors. This fight wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had been silenced, who had been told to look away. "We're not backing down," Jerome said, the resolve in his voice sharper than before. "We're going to make sure everyone knows, no matter the cost." As they turned to leave the tunnel, Jerome looked one last time at the earth they had uncovered. The secrets it held were no longer its own. The truth was out, and it was time to face whatever came next. He didn't know how this battle would end, but he knew he couldn't stop until the land was free of its lies. The air outside felt different, not heavy with secrets, but filled with the promise of change. The land would heal, but not until the truth had been fully exposed. And in that moment, Jerome understood that this wasn't just a fight for justice, it was a fight for the future. The land would never be the same, but it was finally his again.